In this video we're going to show you how to cut down your fork steerer tube. Now there's a couple of reasons why you might want to do this. If you've got some new forks which you're about to fit, then undoubtedly the fork steerer tube is going to be too long and will need to be cut down. Alternatively, you might have lowered your position at the front end and ended up with a situation like this where you've got the headset spaces above the stem, which as you can see doesn't look particularly good. But before you cut the fork steerer tube, make sure you are happy in that position, because once it's done there's no going back and you'll no longer be able to adjust your position upwards. Now of course, to do this job we need to remove the forks from the frame, and as you'd expect here at GCN we've got a video which details exactly how to do that. But before we take the forks out, we need to mark where on the steerer tube we need to cut it, and to do that job it's best to have the bike on the ground. We're not actually going to use this bike for our demonstration because it's brand new and it doesn't yet have an owner, but we do have a different set of forks here with a carbon steerer tube which we are going to cut, and we've already made a mark so we know exactly where we've got to do it. Tools that you're going to need for the job, well of course you're going to need some kind of hacksaw. A normal one will be fine, but we've got a specific carbide blade on this one which helps prevent the fraying of any of the carbon elements on the fork as you cut through it. Now if you can get hold of one of these, either by buying it or borrowing one, this tool really does come in handy to make the job as accurate and easy as possible. This part here clamps into the vise, and this part inside gently clamps onto the steerer tube. Now of course, with any steerer tube, but in particular a carbon one, you don't want to directly clamp it into the vise because you risk damaging it. The mark that you've made on your steerer tube is actually not the place where you need to cut it. You need to cut about 3mm further down the steerer. This allows some space between the top of the steerer tube and the stem cap. That gap allows you to correctly load the bearings on the headset. The easiest way to mark a place 3mm down is to get a 3mm spacer. Place it next to the current mark and draw underneath it to make a new one. Now place the steerer tube into your tool. Place the mark directly underneath the blade guide and tighten it up. Then place the tool in the vise and you're ready to start cutting. On steel steerers you'll have to push down reasonably hard on the saw to cut through it, but on carbon it's important to be more careful. That, along with the fact that it's a much softer material, means that you shouldn't need to put too much pressure on the saw. Also, make sure to keep your eye on the blade rather than the top of the saw to ensure that you're cutting through the steerer perfectly straight. Pay particular attention when you're almost through the steerer. If you rush it, you risk fraying the carbon strands, so just be very gentle. If you followed those steps, then you should end up with a very straight and neat cut like this, and you're then ready to put the forks back into the frame. If you have frayed the carbon at all, then you can either try sticking it back using some resin glue or carefully file the end, making sure to only file upwards, otherwise you'll cause more fraying. When you reinstall the forks, you should find that when you've got everything back on, that you've got a little bit of space between the top of the fork and the top of the stem. If you have, tighten everything up and your job is complete. What type of bike you've got and what type of riding you do. Now we're assuming that having watched our channel you know how to lubricate your chain.